Hello again. This is another version of Climate Matters, where we will be dealing with some of the most important matters on Earth now. I think a lot of us here would agree. Climate, and it matters quite a lot. My name is Stuart Scott. I'll be your host today. And we're coming to you live from the UN Climate Talks in Bonn, Germany. For questions and comments afterward, here's my email address. I'll show it again at the end of our brief time together. And today's topic, can citizens catalyze climate action? Now, our guests today, Joe Robertson. And Joe, excuse me for skipping over it quickly, you're with the Citizens Climate Lobby, yes? And we'll be talking about that today. Yeah. And Maxime Waringer, coordinator of the 11th Conference for Youth, or COI 11. Maxime? Sasha de la Fuente, she's the Dutch youth rep to the United Nations on Sustainable Development. Great. And Lachlan Arts, he's the president of Context News. And we'll hear a little bit from each of them today in our brief show. So, again, today's topic, can citizens catalyze climate action? Governments are trying it here, but can we out there do it as well, or perhaps better? So first, Joe, I want to start right in with Citizens Climate Lobby. Now, I know a good bit about it because I'm a member also. I've done the annual event, but I'll let you say it. What is Citizens Climate Lobby?
So Citizens Climate Lobby is an effort to build local teams of citizen volunteers who train together and become skilled policy advisors for their own legislators. And the event you mentioned is our annual conference in Washington, D.C. In 2010, we had 25 people from around the United States there. The year after that, we had about 80, and then 180. Last year, we had 600, and this year, we're going to have 900. Wow. And then 100 more invited guests. So it's catching fire pretty quickly.
Very good. Well, can't quote unquote catch fire quickly enough.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, can you tell me what evidence is there that this kind of citizen engagement really works, makes a difference?
Sure. So one of the things that we're always trying to combat is the perception that if something is repeated often enough by the press or often enough by public officials, that somehow that's the dominant narrative and that therefore no other narrative can compete with it. So we always hear, well, you know, you can't trust politicians or money wins the argument. And what we see is that those ideas keep floating around in the public arena, but when you have actual conversations with people, you learn a lot that you wouldn't otherwise know. And what we find is that citizens are building real working relationships with their legislators, including lawmakers who are known for denying the need to act on climate. You've got people who are actively working to educate them, answering their questions, getting phone calls from their staff saying, you know, the congressman would like to know about this particular bill. What do you guys think about it? Can you inform us? And so as that has been happening more and more over the last few years, you know, we find ourselves in a situation where we don't want to disclose private conversations because they're real human relationships, and we don't want someone thinking every time they meet with us we're going to tell the whole world, and they're going to suffer political risks. But we're seeing a very different political landscape than the press tell you about on this issue. In the United States Congress, I would say there are no real deniers. That would be my perception. You have people who make public statements to satisfy a constituency, but that's very different from what's actually going on as people are trying to find a footing and get coalitions together.
Now, that's fascinating. That is really fascinating. I suspected as much that our politicians in Washington, D.C. could not possibly be as ignorant of what's going on as they appear to. But you're actually hearing it differently from them, from their staff. Oh, interesting. So they are trying to find political cover, shall we say?
You've got people who have, you know, painted themselves into the proverbial corner. You can't just suddenly change everything you say or do something that you've said was the wrong thing to do and not suffer politically. And most people, I think, can't easily get out of that situation. So it takes a lot of teamwork and coalition building, and it's not easy for them to find each other because of the politics that's been built up over many years.
Very interesting. So, and Citizens Climate Lobby then is providing some means for them finding one another, the non-deniers who appear to be deniers?
Well, we try to make sure that there's actually, a legislative proposal that most people can support.
Now tell us about that.
Yeah. So, well, in the United States and in some other countries, our volunteers are proposing a revenue-neutral carbon fee with 100% dividend to households. So you put a fee on carbon-emitting fuels at the source, and then you return 100% of the revenues directly to households. Every household gets the same amount per capita. And so the benefit of that policy is that it doesn't reflect the stereotypical policy of either side, and it has the kinds of things that line up with the values of both sides. And so that allows us to have a more open conversation with people, where they're not as resistant to the discussion.
We could easily do a half hour just on that carbon fee proposal, but we don't have that luxury today. So let me move on. How is what Citizens Climate Lobby doing translate into global policy?
Well, do we have a clicker or something?
Oh, yes.
So the
Somewhere?
The Pathway to Paris project is our effort to bring this kind of, constructive engagement into the global negotiating process so that citizens can play a role, and it's not about, arguing with or complaining about what people are doing. It's about finding ways to make better things happen. So, I mentioned Pathway to Paris project. We're working with the World We Want platform of the UN Millennium Campaign to bring the Pathway to Paris project to a global audience and to give people a platform where they can actually engage directly. And what we're doing is we're actually sharing a toolkit with the UN country offices through the UN Millennium Campaign so that people can have local conversations where they can talk about what's happening in their communities, talk about what matters to them politically, in terms of the climate, in terms of their economic existence, and really start to play a role in instructing the policy process. So I just have a few images here from Nepal where you've had local volunteer activity really catalyzing action. In fact, in many ways, organizing and executing action that you would expect could be carried out only by, well-trained public authorities. But what happened in response to the earthquake in Nepal was that you had people figure out what the local needs were and start sharing information. You had them building their own local teams, sometimes a coalition of organizations. You had them going to communities and working with people in need directly. And that same kind of volunteer action can happen on the climate policy issue. So our toolkit provides for hosting open working sessions where people get together and they talk about what matters to them locally. They get into working groups and they begin to work on policy recommendations. And then as that network expands, this is an image of our conference last year, as that network expands, you actually have people who are in the process, who are engaging with public officials on policy, and who are providing an instructional role like people at this table have been doing. And so it's not just those who are policy wonks, it's not just those who are lucky to get a badge, it's people who are outside the process who actually start to have a way to engage. And I just wanted to share this quote from the Italian professor Susanna Cafaro, who's a supporter of this project. She believes that citizens should be able to engage in global policy processes as a matter of democratic rights, that it shouldn't be that the only way you're ever represented is because a national government represents you. And of course, people who have a certain amount of privilege or a certain amount of access can do that, but most people can't. And so her vision is that we've actually been building up to this for a long time, and that there are a lot of different organizations and institutions that are working on creating a global process for direct participation. But now we have an opportunity to really do that in a big way. And that's kind of what this underlying effort is. So We call this project the Citizens Climate Engagement Network. This is something that we're going to officially launch during the COP21. It's going to be an outcome of this year of ongoing engagement and of what happens in those local meetings. And the thing that's going to be unique about the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, you can see those circles there, that's an effort to try to remove the barriers between the different circles of access and give more people on the outside a direct role in policy making. The really unique thing is that it's never going to turn off. So when the COP21 ends, the Citizens Climate Engagement Network will just be getting started. And this network that we're building through this year of engagement is going to continue its work, having more local meetings, working on policy documents, preparing for the next negotiations, and really working to support the people who are inside the process. So just to kind of sum up and answer the question of whether citizens can catalyze climate action.
Yes.
Yes, that's the short answer, right? Local working sessions, building local teams that keep supporting each other, right? Getting
letters to the editor, calls to your congressperson.
Yeah, I mean,
all of the above.
Engaging directly is very important. It's not as hard as people think. In my experience, it's not only true in Western democracies, it's true in most cases. People who represent other people have a responsibility, and when it's brought to their attention that you recognize that and you honor that and you expect things from them, there's a feeling of excitement and a feeling of heroism that comes with that, and you can really help make people do better if you engage them in that way.
I like to, when I do my public presentations about climate and I try to get people out of their seats, so to speak, and active, I tell them that our politicians respond to two things. Yes, they respond to campaign contributions. The money does talk, but they also respond to their citizens, their voters. And you don't have to have 10,000 people calling on a day for them to take notice. Mm-hmm. You just have to have a spike. And they have people on their staff who report them daily the numbers of people who are calling on any particular issue. And when you have a spike of 10 or 20 or 50 people calling about a particular issue, that's something they do take notice of.
Yeah, in fact, I wouldn't discourage people from big campaigns because they can have an impact, but my experience is that you're talking about human beings, and if you imagine the office environment, I might agree with your cause, but if you shut down my entire office and we can't communicate and we can't get anything done, we never hear you because we don't have time to listen to 4,000 phone messages. And so we don't actually get your message, and we can't really be on your side because we haven't interacted. Yeah. But if 20 people call in and have real conversations, then that's a really catalytic change in the office environment.
And before we go on, my last note on that is don't be afraid of calling your MP or senator or legislator, because they have a very pleasant young man or woman at the other end who's trained to take your call, to ask you what it's about, and they're very pleasant conversations. I've done plenty of them. But let's move on, if we may. Sasha, so you're from Netherlands?
I am.
Oh, good. Okay. And you are what we would call a member of the youth delegation, yes? No?
Yes, I'm part of the youth constituency here.
Youth constituency.
Yes, so
okay, well,
we're not a delegation. We don't have an official say.
I will let you know that I was the oldest member of the youth delegation when the constituency was formed. I was in the room and I raised eyebrows. The UN staffers who were there looked at me and said, whoa. But because a constituency is not allowed to be biased against age, gender, sex, race, or anything, I'm a member of Youngo. I'm a member of the youth constituency. That may redeem me a little bit to you. I made some politically incorrect comment before we started, which I will pay for. Anyhow, Sasha, from your perspective as a member of the younger generation, loosely speaking, you're younger than I am. Please tell us about your experience in engaging in this process of the climate talks and with the United Nations.
So I kind of have a double role as a youth representative in my country. So I'm part of the Dutch delegation, which is quite an honor, and it's really nice. They take me seriously, and they appreciate the work that I do, which is kind of an unlikely position to be in
So you're
as a younger member.
You're a member of the negotiating delegation that comes here, the official delegation, yes?
I don't advocate any Dutch government policies, so I'm free to say whatever I like here, or at least within my mandate. So
Yes.
I'm free to advocate the position of Dutch youth, but it doesn't have to be the same as the official statement from the Dutch government.
Oh,
so that
okay.
gives me a lot of wiggle room. So back home, I talk to thousands of young people every year, and they kind of tell me what issues they find important. And then here, I try to translate that into the kind of language that people respond to here. That is a challenge as a young person being untrained. So communication in itself is difficult. And I'm lucky to be part of a delegation and here with a party badge, but most youth are here as observers, so they don't have access to all the materials, to all the negotiations, and that's a huge barrier for them to participate.
But you're not finding it a barrier.
Well, I mean, I'm lucky in that sense that I can go to my delegation and say, well, I don't know what's happening here and I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And they usually say yes. So this cooperation is what allows me to be successful here.
So I understand that your goal is to create a process that's more inclusive of your generation, shall we say. I hate to say your generation, but we're a continuum of humanity from young to old, but loosely speaking, your generation. So how are you going to make that happen? How are you going to get youth more involved?
Well, back home, what we did last year was we cooperated with about 40 youth organizations and made a statement that we wanted more education on sustainable development. So this came from thousands of young people, and now our government has really picked this up and is trying to do something with this. So I think it's all about making a collective statement. Within the youth constituency, we have members from all across the world. So you would think that it's kind of like a mini United Nations all within itself, and it is. But we always find a way to find co-benefits, to find compromises. And we're trained in, getting this inclusiveness within Youngo. So I think this generation, as soon as we're in the negotiator spots, we'll know what to do. And we'll know how to make this process a lot more accessible to everyone.
Good. Now, I didn't state this ground rule to start with, so I'll state it now, and then I'll apply it. You used, and I may have used also, the acronym Youngo. And if we use any acronyms, our audience may not know those acronyms, so let's define. Youngo is the Youth NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So there's NGOs, the environmental NGOs. This is UN speak for all of the different constituencies, which are groups that have a like-minded objective. There's also the bingos, which are the business NGOs. They're the bad guys, arguably speaking. No, we have to acknowledge that economics is very important in the picture, and we need to transit to a fossil-free world, in my opinion, and find ways to do that and take everybody at the table, and the bingos are the business representatives. We can't crash economies just quick. I'm working my way into a corner saying we can't crash them intentionally. They may crash of their own, but we have to try to transit to a sustainable world. Thank you. So if we can move on to Lachlan. First, are you Scotch in your background?
They always said Scotch-Irish, so I'm not exactly sure what that means, but that's the term that was used.
Okay, good. Okay, can you tell us about your organization, Context News, and how does that bring you to the climate talks?
Okay, thank you. So the focus of Context News is not what a lot of news is focused on, which is information or a particular perspective. Our focus is on opportunity and action. And so what the intent of Context News is to actually get at whatever situation is that we're reporting on, to get at it at the level of the context of the situation so that it leaves someone not just informed, but actually empowered. And so when we started reporting on climate change a little over a year ago, which I know was late, but
Better late than never.
We're a relatively new network. So what we found in terms of the context that the situation lived in for a lot of people was that it was too big and too complex. And so it basically left them with not much opportunity to take any action, and so they kind of did their part. Well, they recycled, they used less gas, something like that, but they didn't really see a connection between what they were doing and the big picture called a sustainable future. And so we went to work at kind of bridging that gap for people, and what we found is that when people when it stopped being something that was too big and actually started to be something that, maybe it is something I can actually do something about, that's kind of where we bring people to. And then what's next is, okay, well, what are the actual actions or the things that I can participate in that would actually have the action that I take? I would actually know, as somebody who's a stakeholder in the world, who's kind of taken ownership for the planet, that this action actually does translate to something in the future that, for example, will keep us from surpassing the 1.5 or 2 degree limit. And that's where I got involved with Joe and the Citizens Climate Lobby, because that's just such an awesome resource to offer to people if you want to get involved in actually impacting the policy. Awesome, right? And then there are other organizations like that, but again, our job is to kind of, to free people up from the constraint of the context in which the situation has lived, and then once they get freed up, there's opportunities to take action, and then that's our job then, is to kind of offer those opportunities so that people actually leave empowered and in action, not just informed.
Thank you. I want to pick one thing out that rang in my ear and explain to our audience. You said 1.5 or 2 degrees.
Yes.
Now, so far the negotiations have been for years aiming to keep the average temperature of Earth from exceeding 2 degrees above pre-industrial times. That's been the goal. But the gentleman who I believe proposed that initially, Dr. James Hansen, very shortly after recanted and said that's way too high. 1.5 is about the most we can go. But here it is many years later, and only this time now am I hearing finally there are many nations standing up and saying 2 degrees is too much.
Yeah.
1.5. That is 1.5 degrees centigrade average above the pre-industrial era, 1850. We are already almost a degree above,
yes.
And we're feeling the storms and the wildfires and the collapse of agriculture in nations and in the nation state of California.
Yes.
It's already happening, and we're not even at 1 degree.
Yeah, and so one of our charges is that, because I don't think most people know that.
Yes.
And I don't think most people know that even at this conference, people are predicting that at COP21 in December, that kind of a commitment will not be made. So to wake people up to that, and then what, as civil society, can we engage in between now and December to actually have those pledges be aggressive enough that it will, ensure sustainability?
Yeah, we've touched on this 1.5 versus 2 degrees in several of these Climate Matters shows, so I hope the audience will look and watch more than one. Let's move on quickly, because we're running out of time, for Maxime. I understand you're associated with something called the Conference of Youth, or COI, and this is the 11th year, the 11th meeting, so it's COI 11. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, exactly. So the COI, the Conference of Youth, is a gathering of young people from the younger constituency, the youth constituency here in this negotiation theater, I would say. And that's usually the place where young people from all over the world gather to share experience and build projects together. That's an event that usually happens a couple of days before each conference of party, the COP. And in December, in November, the 11th Conference of Youth will be held from the 26th to the 28th of November. And we had in mind the fact that, well, that's an event that is located in the very same city as the COP. And that's for many people, that's a place where they cannot go, and especially for young people and people from the Global South. And so far, we came up with the idea that, well, we are living in we are an internet and connected generation, and we want to take the opportunity to provide as many people as possible with an access to this event. So not only broadcasting conferences and workshops, but trying to build local events all over the world on the 5 continents and having a two-way communication.
And what's the name, the symbol you're using for that global effort?
Yeah, we're calling them local COI or local event.
Okay.
And the idea is to have a locally anchored and structured mobilization to make sure that we, think globally, act locally.
How can young people who are listening to this from around the world hook into COI? Is there a website?
Yeah, you got a website. It's www.coi11.org, where you can either register for the Paris event. We already have about 100 people registered, and we aim to reach a couple of thousand people in November. And you can also build and organize the local events anywhere in the world. So
wonderful.
We got good feedback from Madagascar and Canada. We got good feedback to organize local events in Madagascar, in Canada, and China so far, and we hope it will expand till
I'm sorry to be talking over you, but we're getting close on time, so I want to repeat it for the viewers. It's COY11.org?
Yeah, that's
okay, very good. We are almost out of time, so I've heard little bits from you, Joe, about Pathway to Paris. Can you very quickly tell us about Pathway to Paris?
Sure. So if you want to join this global effort, you can go to pathwaytoparis.org, and you can learn a lot more about it. But Pathway to Paris is an effort to bring people directly into the UN process through local meetings, online engagement, and then eventually work streams that play a role in influencing policy here within the negotiations.
So it's a network of networks.
It is a network of networks. We're working with the Policy and Strategy Group of the World We Want platform, which is 17 UN institutions and 120 civil society organizations from all over the world. It includes indigenous peoples groups as well. We're working with the Climate Action Network. We're in the process of getting a working group started up to help participatory design processes get started. We're going to be integrating outputs from the worldwide views on climate and energy consultations that are happening tomorrow in 80 countries into the Pathway to Paris space on the world we want.
A lot going on.
Yeah, and the idea is that all these things can flow together, hopefully with other efforts like the COI and the COP in My City efforts and other things being done by a lot of groups, so that we have constant ongoing engagement, and this can actually become part of the Secretariat process.
Great, wonderful. And this, again, is on the internet at pathwaytoparis.org?
That's right.
Okay, so another URL for our viewers to check out. Well, I want to thank you all very much. It's been way too short a time to get into what you're all doing with any depth. I'm sorry for that, but at least our viewers know of all these things that are going on, especially the youth things, because the youth are the inheritors of the planet. My generation got to mess it up, and you get to try to fix it up, so thank you for your engagement. So I want to thank you all. Again, this is Climate Matters, and I'm Stuart Scott for this very brief half hour, coming to you live from the UN Climate Talks in Bonn, Germany. There's my email address if you'd like to be in touch with questions or comments. I want to thank everyone for watching. Thank you for caring about the climate, about your world. And I want to thank you for doing all that you can, and hope that you will think of doing more. And here's one way to get more involved. It's a sign-up list at a website I created. Actually, it's just a splash page now. The website's under development, called rebootworld.org. So please go and sign up, and we hope you'll watch many of these programs. Thank you very much.